Good evening, everybody. I will now call this October 26, 2021 Committee Meeting of the Whole to order. Welcome, board members, staff, members of the public here, and members of the public watching. We have one agenda item today. Superintendent, will we be hearing about from Superintendent and from Senior Officer Moore. So I'm going to turn it over to begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Ellison. Good evening, Student Representative Deborah Meskel, Board Director, staff, and those of you who are joining us here this evening. Tonight, we're excited to share a progress update on one of our key components of the comprehensive district design and a foundational element of our next strategic plan, the climate framework. As you'll hear about in more detail here shortly from Senior Officer Moore, this framework is grounded in its four values, and they're going to guide every aspect of our work in the classroom, in our staffing decisions, and our family and community engagement, and in our school buildings. Well, Senior Officer Moore will spend most of the presentation time focusing on our current and future state of the framework. I do want to spend just a minute to reground all of us and anyone watching tonight who might not have been able, who might not have the history on this topic and the work that has brought us to this place. So every element of what you'll hear about tonight came to be through intentional co-creation with parents, students, and staff. We have several months and years of honest feedback from our community, informed the need of this work and the development of such an explicit and direct roadmap. Through our parent participatory evaluation and our youth participatory evaluation, and with a steering committee, which consisted of staff, labor leadership, students, and parents, the framework values and core beliefs were formed and the overall direction was provided. So it's important to acknowledge that throughout some of these efforts, and in some cases, there was a traumatization of what it meant to engage in these conversations. And I ask us all to recommit to continue this crucial work, especially when it's hard, because our students, our community deserves this of us, and it's how we properly honor those who shared their story with us in these experiences. So I also believe as we move forward together, necessarily guided by plans and measured against metrics, I believe that this work, which is at the core, is about how we treat one another, and it's the foundation to everything else. And while we begin down this path, the framework does represent a great opportunity and hope for Minneapolis Public Schools. It's about the transparency. We need to do things differently, better, and turn into a commitment to our students, families, and ourselves. And long before we begin this work, before the pandemic, the past few years really only underscored that MPS together means a brighter future. And I'd like to thank Chair Ellison and the entire board for allowing us to spend some time on this topic tonight and for your continued focus and investment in this work. In addition to thanking the students, parents, and staff for their work on the framework, I also want to recognize Senior Officer Moore and his team for all the coordination and leadership to get us to this point. So with that, Senior Officer Moore, I'll turn it over to you to go ahead and present to the board.
Thank you, Superintendent, Chair Ellison, members of the board. So my pleasure to have the opportunity to present to you tonight an update on the climate framework. And certainly, as the superintendent mentioned, there's been the creation, the hard work of a number of people across different areas, from students, teachers, to principals, parents, central office administrators, senior officers. And so tonight we're going to talk a bit about, try to reaffirm, as the superintendent mentioned, our commitment to the work. We want to talk about process. You're going to be able to see some real life examples. I'm really proud to see work, for example, from Anderson, as well as Anderson, as well as Nellie Stone. And so those are two examples of how this work translates to real life. And then finally, we'll have a chance to look at some metrics and talk about accountability. Accountability is obviously important, critical, because we're also doing this work in context. There's my cue. So we're also doing this work in context of a pandemic. And also, I would just share personally, you know, as an African-American male working within the system, that this work happens in the context of history, in the context of the space within the district. We have a responsibility as a school district in terms of our culture, the way and know we do things, to understand the way that we know and do things impacts how our staff, our students, our families show up in our spaces. And so tonight we're going to reaffirm our values. And I want to just share that, you know, when I look at this quote, I can't help but think about our staff, our principals, our central office employees that are pushing. They're pushing hard, and they're exhausted. And there's still a commitment, though. There's still a commitment to the central work that we do regarding our students. There's a love for our community. So to those folks, central office and principals and teachers and staff, students, families, just want to say that I see you, I appreciate you, and sincerely I love you for the work that you do on behalf of our community. And so folks are running, they're walking, in some cases they're exhausted, they're crawling, but everyone's moving forward. Everyone's moving forward. And so that's something to build upon. And so now we have a responsibility to create the spaces in which people can be their best selves. So there's a bit, we're going to cover a bit tonight, and I talked about commitment, process, accountability, but I think it's important to talk about all of the elements of the framework because it is quite comprehensive. This is the work that we do as a school district. This is the space that we're creating for the Minneapolis community. And so we'll talk about the timeline. I'll share some work around school improvement. So there's a process, a plan to make sure that this is actionable. As I mentioned before, we'll talk a bit about a couple of schools, some exemplars. We'll share a bit about parent participatory evaluation. There's some really good work happening around QComp leadership positions that supports this work as we build leadership of our staff. We'll share an update on the site council EDIA. Right? We talked about our site councils and how critical those site councils are as spaces in which people can fully engage in this work. I want to share an update on the equity competencies. Right? So we're creating a space, a climate, but in order to fully participate in that climate, we need to be able to have a set of competencies. And I think it was mentioned at the last meeting by Director Enns about competencies that we're expecting. And ultimately, we're redefining who is it, what are the qualities that we want of our district staff, our teachers in this district. So these are our values. We'll talk about a hate bias incident protocol, and then we'll share a bit about some of our beliefs, work around staff mental and emotional well-being and support. So, but ultimately, we're going to do it together, and we're going to move from climate framework to Minneapolis together, as Superintendent mentioned. I mean, this work can't happen without us working together and struggling together and crawling and walking and running together. So that's the work we're going to do around our 4 areas. We're going to focus on the work in the classroom, in our staffing decisions, in our family engagement, community engagement, and in our buildings, around areas such as equity, representation, anti-racism. I'm going to take a bit of time just to name these because I think it's important to get the words out in the space. We're going to value physical and emotional safety and well-being. We're going to be a district that focuses on relationships, trust, and communication. And as mentioned, shared decision-making and voice, the work of our youth, our students, our families, that they do have a say, our community, in the work that we do. Right? And ultimately, as we share power and decision-making and voice, we elevate, right, relationship, trust, and communication, et cetera. We're in phase 3, and actually, if I pointer, does the pointer show up? Pointer doesn't show up on the screen. I will say we're actually between 2 and 3. So if you see spring, fall, we are still continuing to have conversations about the climate framework, what it is, why it's important. Again, this is the critical work that we do, and it's even more important in a space of recovering from the murder of George Floyd. It's important in the context of a pandemic. As we go in the buildings, it's critical as we see some of our students that haven't been in school. The entire classrooms haven't been in school for over a year. And so this work becomes critical about setting up those classroom spaces such that we're honoring the students that we serve. We're honoring the families that we serve as we're struggling with our economic downturn. And so how do we engage our families in a respectful way? How do we support our teachers and our principals that are putting in numerous hours wanting to do the best on behalf of our students? So we're in phase 2. We're going into phase 3. Right now we're doing school goals and strategies. We are looking at infusing this work in departments. We're developing a climate index, which I'll share, so that's an accountability piece, things that we're looking at to see to what extent is the climate getting better or not. And then there'll be progress reports to you as the board. There'll be site reports, school-based reports, as well as a report to you as a school board. And then as we go into phase 4, ultimately that's the work beginning in the fall. So frequent updates to you, commitment to doing this work, the process of a climate framework, and being accountable to the folks that we serve. So we've identified a climate focus, right? So we're doing the needs assessment. I'll talk a bit about that. It's really important that as we're, and this is the site council work, assessing school and the staff that work here, our department climate with the climate rubric. So we have these values, identifying the climate framework. And the work we're doing now is we're looking to see the extent to which our espoused values actually are an indication of reality. And then we're developing plans to address the reality that we're currently existing in with the idea that we're moving towards the future, which is really challenging right now. It's really challenging for folks, as exhausted as people are, mentally, emotionally. But we constantly move forward with the hope of having a better day, a better climate, so that we can be our best selves. So we'll have our climate rubric. We'll align the budget to the strategy. So there's dollars set aside as a result of the comprehensive district design. Schools will receive, I believe, $5 per student to support climate goals. So the plans will be funded. And so that's exciting. We will then continue, we'll do a climate survey to assess, and then we're going to continue to infuse this work in the school improvement plan with the idea that there's going to be constant feedback loops on the work that we're doing. School improvement timeline. So here's the needs analysis process, as mentioned. And there's a variety. So we have instructional leadership teams. So typically in schools, the instructional leadership team is the group that monitors the academic progress. As we've moved this work forward, we are recognizing that climate and culture is on the same plane as the academic work, right? That's such that if we don't have a positive climate, if the way that we know and do things in this district aren't inclusive of all that work here, all that attend school here, then we're not going to get the outcomes that we desire. So the ILT has reviewed current data plans. We're currently in the process now of doing the co-interpretation of data. November, early December, we're identifying challenges, root causes, strategies are identified. This is just an example, step by step of how we're doing the work. Not going to go into detail, but this is just to give you confidence. The work is moving. I think one of the challenges sometimes I feel also in presenting is that as a school board, giving you confidence that the work is happening, and also giving the community confidence that the work is happening. So we do present this work such that people in different schools should be expecting to see these things. And so again, that's an example of shared accountability. So schools are going through the process of reviewing their data in a variety of manners. The survey data, the focus groups, the conversations are in multiple languages so that all can participate in multiple ways that we're collecting the data, and there will be co-interpretation. Our climate index, as mentioned, there's a rubric in which schools are assessing. There's a self-assessment process conducted by a sample of students, families, and staff in each school. Plus, right, end of year climate survey allows us to measure the perceptions, right? So sometimes climate is about how you perceive your environment. Perhaps it's not the structures you have, but if people aren't perceiving the climate as one that is just, fair, people perceive they're not valued and seen and heard and respected, then you're not going to have people exhibit the engagement and participation in that culture that you want. And then we have climate indicators. We're going to look at things such as traditional discipline referral data, disproportionality, but we're also going to look at things such as student retention. One of the things we know, for example, is across the district, the retention rates across similar student groups, they vary by school. That is that some schools do a better job than others of retaining students, okay? Some schools do a better job of retaining staff. So those are new things that we're starting to examine in the context of climate. Ultimately, we'll aggregate these things, and each school will have a climate index report. For the district data, we're going to do an aggregate of each school's climate index. So we take all the school information. We also have district level indicators. So we'll look at things such as to what extent are we investing with our budget in areas that support climate. That's something that the board has mentioned before, right? A budget is a document that signals the values, what the district believes in, okay? We'll also take a look at representation of district staff levels and committees. So we'll take a look at representation on committees across departments by issues of background, race, culture, gender, language, making sure that we have representation across groups and we set targets and goals. Ultimately, we have a district-wide climate report that'll be available to you so that you can monitor progress. I want to just highlight, I'll go towards the middle column where it says the Cultivate Survey. You're going to recognize some of these measures as we move forward into our strategic planning conversations. Goal 2, student well-being. Goal 4, focusing on climate. We have a set of new measures that we're going to use as part of this work. One of the things that you charged to us as a school board was to move beyond traditional measures such as math, literacy, right, discipline referrals. So we're going to look at things such as, to what extent do our classrooms affirm the identities of our students, the positive identities? To what extent do students have a sense of agency? That is, that as we're engaging, we want to have our students feel that they can do whatever they put their mind to with the appropriate support, right? To what extent do they feel like when they're in the classroom that they're getting the appropriate feedback so they can improve on the work that they're doing, right? And we think about that as growth mindset, right? The extent that you try something challenging, but you have to get the feedback in order to have growth. And so we want to talk to students and say, is that happening to you in the classroom? To what extent do teachers care? Is there a perception of caring? Sometimes we know that, and I'll say this as a parent myself, there may be actions that I do that I believe shows that my son cares. But if he's not feeling that those actions are related to caring, then I'm not going to get the behaviors, the conversations that I'm anticipating. So sometimes there is a disconnect when we look at the data. We know that our teachers care deeply, our principals care deeply about our students, but we have to do actions to show students that. And so sometimes that's as simple as having a conversation, right? A direct conversation with the students. And then meaningful work, right? That's relevancy. So to what extent do students feel that they're doing things that are relevant to their own lives? And we know that makes a difference in terms of engagement. So these are a set of measurement tools, rubrics, surveys, both fall, spring. The climate survey, for example, that's going to be in grades 5, 12, so we'll be able to get an elementary, middle, and high school measure. But it is certainly comprehensive in terms of our ability to look at this work. So let's look at some amazing work that Anderson United Middle School has done. And Anderson's very interesting because through the comprehensive district design, with the boundary change, they actually are a school that received this year 30 different communities. Okay, so through the boundary, I mean, there's 30, and it's also dually challenging in the sense that they're also having a program. They have a dual language program there. So not only are they bringing in different communities, but they have 2 programs, and now they're trying to merge a dual language program with a non-dual language program. And so starting with the former Denise Wells and now the current principal, Tara Fitzgerald, they've worked really hard. And in fact, they started that work a year prior, focusing, for example, on having a committee in which they were very cognizant to include educational service professionals. Okay? And they paid educational service professionals to be part of that work. And so that's something that traditionally it does not happen across the district. That was something extremely important. They made sure that students were equally on the committee, parents. They talked to their youth evaluation groups, their site councils. They asked for input in a variety of ways. They had parent nights for dual language families as well as special education families as well as students. And then they had a shared community event, but where they engaged over 500 people over the course of the year. And then from there, they developed a mission and vision, based upon the feedback of the course of a year. And the mission is extremely powerful. If you look at the language, it reflects the community. I mean, this is a really nice example, in my opinion, of shared decision-making and voice, right? That you take the time to engage. Here's the mission. You see words such as a multilingual, integrated environment, right? Anderson formerly was a racially identifiable school. Now they have a value focused on integration. In fact, they even have some integration discussion groups. Like, how do you bring people from all over the district together with various communities, demographics? They have a focus on, in their mission, pursuing dreams, peaceful world, intercultural understanding. So I just want to have us pay attention to the value of language, their vision. Every student is career and college ready. Core values of inclusion, anti-racism, belonging, future ready. These are the words of the community. This is how they want to engage. And so just really proud and excited of the work that they've done. And this comes from just phenomenal, as I mentioned, building leadership, not only the principal, the assistant principals, but their teacher leaders. Right? And so this is an example of work that is happening now. And what's exciting about this, I'll share, is that when this mission and vision was developed, they shared this mission and vision, their core values, during their workshop week and during their open house in May. They also used this document to support the hiring of staff. So as they're thinking about who they wanted to be a part of their community from a hiring standpoint, they used their core values to signal the type of staff that they wanted to have. And this is what we're trying to do district-wide with the climate framework and equity competencies. But they certainly use this during interview and select, and it guided their work to make sure that the staff, the folks that are serving our students and our community, represent the values, right, of that community. I want to also share with you some work that's happened at Nellie Stone Johnson, their student leadership. I had the pleasure of visiting Nellie Stone Johnson, and you know, this was on the wall. This is so amazing, which is you have students defining, elementary students defining how they want to be involved in the school, and the principal is committed, and the assistant principal, they've committed to making sure, for example, that these things happen. So they say they want to focus on leadership. They want to participate in school decisions, right? 4th, 5th graders. They want to be able to talk to other students and serve in kind of a leadership mentoring capacity. The word about pride, right? They talked about, and that's climate. The students want to talk about ways in which people are proud to go to Nellie Stone Johnson. And it may not, this is an example of leadership where students are having the opportunity to not only define what they want to do, but then as adults, we put our arms around our students to make sure they're successful. Again, supporting growth mindset, supporting sense of agency. That's the work we do around the climate framework. I also want to talk a bit about parent participatory evaluation. And board member Gabriel Meskill, thank you, led a discussion, facilitated a discussion during workshop week with all of our staff on the climate framework. And I've mentioned that before. This was an example of citywide government, working with our youth evaluators, working with our parent evaluators, and really talking about data that's been collected over years. And it hasn't changed, and we shared that in the strategic plan conversation. But what we've decided to do is move that work to the site level. And so as part of the comprehensive district design, as part of the teacher equity plan led by Senior Officer Sullivan, in conjunction, in partnership with the equity department and our associates, really taking a look at site-based parent evaluation. So 15 sites will have the opportunity to do deep engagement around areas that are of deep interest to them. And in some cases, the schools are combining their site councils with the parent evaluators. But it's a great opportunity, similar to the district. When parents are engaged, they're knocking on the doors of their neighbors. They know their communities. They're collecting information about what type of school do we want this to be? How does equity look in the classroom? These families, these parents will, as part of their project, will present their findings to staff, and there'll be an action plan attached to that. Again, the way that you develop trust based on this work is you ask people for their opinion. You allow a space for people to be in the center of the work, and then you act upon it. You have that feedback loop, and that's how it develops trust. Unfortunately, there's been an ongoing narrative of collecting information, particularly from communities of color, and not providing feedback back. We do that a lot with students as well. We collect a lot of information from our students, but we don't share what we're doing with it. We don't talk about the extent to which it's making a difference. So these are the schools that are participating in it, and I just think this is kind of a cool slide. It just is kind of reflective of all the different communities that'll be participating in the 15 areas. Part of the CDD, we're looking at expanding that as part of the ESSER funding. For this year, we have 15. But we believe this will make a difference. We did the pilot at Hmong International Academy. We did the pilot at Hall. Families received it extremely well. Ultimately, as we engage in conversations about market share, right, what better thing to do than have parents that are engaged collecting information from other parents, even from parents that don't attend the school. When I go to the school locations, I see these beautiful schools and really robust communities. And we look at the market share, and we know that there's a lot of work that we can do. We can do our work better. That's the premise of the comprehensive district design, is to do a community school model better. And so parents talking to parents, being excited about the work that we're doing, that's how we're going to improve market share. So we believe this has a lot of promise. And these 15 locations are going to support us in doing it. QComp leadership roles. We talk about QComp and the importance of developing teacher leaders, okay? And again, if we're going to shift the climate in our schools, it's going to come not only from the principals, but it comes from the teachers. And we know that buildings that have positive climates have a positive relationship with their teachers. The principals have a positive relationship with their teachers, and the teachers have ownership of the outcomes. They don't always agree. Principals, central office folks, teachers don't always agree. Students don't always agree, but we work together. And so part of leadership is having difficult conversation with each other. So we have 3 models of leadership, and we've always had traditionally the yellow box, our instructional leadership team, which typically does the work of school improvement. And typically that work is really focused on academics, math literacy, graduation rates. We've had our site council, and again, we're going to have a site council EDIA, but we have parents, family liaisons, community. What do site councils do? Well, site councils should, right, review the academic plan. They should review the budget, provide feedback on the budget. They will now support, right, review climate, so they're part of conversations about climate. And one of the things that we don't utilize our site councils enough is they actually provide leadership on family engagement. Okay, so what better way to know how to engage parents to actually talk with parents in different languages? And I'll share later in this presentation about our commitment to making sure that our site councils are representative of the schools. And we want to have a diverse group of families participating in multiple languages with translations and interpreters. Language is not going to be a barrier for full participation in our schools. And so we have our site councils. What's new is the equity engagement team, and that work really started, the equity engagement group, equity leads 2017, 2018, through QComp funding. We developed a youth voice advisor. Voice advisor, for example, is helping to lead the work at Nellie Stone, along with the administrative team. And then we had our positive school engagement lead, now shifted to a culture and climate lead. That's where the climate framework work leads. So there's a group of teacher leaders, as well as other staff that are part of the equity engagement team at the ILT Site Council. They work together to make sure that the work is happening. Our role as a central office, reviewing those plans and making sure that we have a support mindset and that we're supporting the schools and making sure they can do the work that they know how to do. And so again, going back to the relationship between the school district, right, the culture, the way we know and do things, our responsibility for having a climate in which these groups, these teacher leaders, can work together and be successful. So that's an example of how the infrastructure we have. They're actually going to do, we do shared understanding. They're getting professional development, the leads, as identified, focusing on knowing themselves, which is aligned to the equity competencies, cultivating genius, which is aligned to the work you've seen in previous presentations of the work of Goldie Muhammad that talks about culturally sustaining pedagogy. So we want to make sure that not only we're leading at the district level, not only the principals are leading, but we're engaging those teachers in many cases that have been in the schools 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years. But this is how we work together, having shared knowledge, understanding, opportunities to debate. And then February, March, we're going to just talk about engagement and student and family voice. So we have 2 sessions focusing on that. Great way to leverage knowledge and leadership across the district as we come together. A great way to build community amongst central office folk and our teachers. And so really excited to have the opportunity and collaboration with QComp funding to be able to do this work. And so this is just sharing you the definition of the youth advisor and the equity, culture, and climate leads. Do want to spend a second talking about, as part of the ESSER funding, citywide student leadership and youth voice network. Thank you, your leadership, Board Member Geber-Meskel, and you've been really working us hard and holding us accountable for making sure we're doing things the right way on behalf of students, so thank you for that. But this is a formal collaboration between the student engagement coordinator, right, located in the academic division, the student board representative, the evaluation team. One of the things that students have been very clear about when you talk about engagement is like we haven't been doing it in a respectful way, such that I can recall maybe 3 years ago, I was asked to get engagement, do engagement with students on the budget. So here I come into the room, maybe I had an hour to present on a $700 million budget. And the students, to their credit, what are they going to do with that? What kind of feedback are they going to provide? So this is actually putting students at the center, letting them define what engagement looks like. And across not only this group, we learned this Equity Diversity Impact Assessment group under the leadership of Tyrese Cox. She's also the new Executive Director of Engagement. It was the PACs. We're shifting to a direction of if we're fully going to engage people, our stakeholders, we need to have time for there to be understanding of what we're engaging them on. So this represents a formal collaboration in which we're compensating our students for their expertise because they're going to support us in doing our work better. And oftentimes we know that our students have the answers. We just need to ask them. Now we're going to compensate them. We're going to work them hard. You know, I mean, I think that's fair. We're going to work them hard, but we're going to compensate them for their expertise. And they're going to support us in our planning, as well as making meaning of the data that we come up with. So this is an example of how we're shifting the narrative, shifting the culture. Traditionally, the way we know and do our work in the district has been adult, right? Adults make the decision that is passed down. This is a shift in the way we know and do things. Hopefully, it changes the climate, right? How we experience, our students experience our district, which is now in a leadership position, having shared, say, decision-making power in the decisions that we make. So very excited about that work. Update on the equity considerations, EDIA, and I'm going to focus just on site councils. At the policy committee, that we're going to present the equity versus impact assessment full EDIA on fundraising. So that work is happening, and you see the timeline here. We're actually doing some dual data collection. Data collection period is actually occurring between August through November. So we're currently, relative to the site council, second bullet, we have a site council survey. We're asking site councils, what do they think? Do they know what they're expected to do? Right? We find that sometimes systemically there isn't a shared understanding of what a site council does. Sometimes parents don't participate in the site council because they don't think it's meaningful work. Again, I can't think of more important work than looking at academic plans, budget, climate, engagement. But we don't necessarily do that across the district, and not in an intentional way, but I just think we have to, at times, recommit to the policy, in this case 1692, and make sure everyone has a shared understanding. We're going to also do focus groups with the associate superintendents, site council survey, focus groups. The goal in December is that we'll have the data collected from both EDIAs. We will have the site council EDIA and the fundraising EDIA ready by January with potential recommendations based upon, as we do the shared co-interpretation with our stakeholders, with possible recommendations to both policy and process. So right now we're kind of in the interrogation stage and wanting to see to what extent are we following the board's desires regarding the policy 1692. And you see the questions here. Are we implementing the policy? Do site councils have decision-making power? To what extent? And obviously the principal has the final say in decisions, but to what extent do site council participants feel like they're being heard? We also want to look at representation, and also do site council understand and engage in the activities? And so what are the things we're looking at? Well, every site council should have a set of bylaws. Right? We're going to engage with our associates and see the extent to which they understand the implementation of the site councils. To what extent are they aware of how well site councils are going in their respective schools? I think that they do have a very high knowledge. They are engaged. School leader survey, and there'll be a site council member survey. I would expect also, if needed, as needed, we'll also do some selected interviews and focus groups. All right? So sometimes surveys aren't the best way to collect information. We will give the survey during the site council, though. And so to that extent, it will be in multiple languages again, and we'll have interpretation as needed. We talked about climate, right? So we have a climate, but who are the folks we want to really talk about? What characteristics do we need to engage in a climate that focuses on equity, representation, and racism, shared decision-making and power, supporting the whole child, right? So we have our different areas of climate framework, but a group of folks across the department, I'm just really excited. If you take a look at, you take a look at the various departments and folks, I mean, it's just a group of amazing people that have spent, close to a year drafting these competencies. Now, the next step will be to go before principals as well as teachers. These are groups that support our schools, but just really thinking about, from a central office standpoint, for example, what are the characteristics that folks need to be able to fully live out the values and beliefs of the climate framework. And more so, what they challenged us on was this is, you saw the group is very comprehensive across various departments. They challenged us on the fact that this framework exists within context, in the sense that where we began is very different than where we've ended up, because we're doing this work based upon what we need as a school community based upon murder of George Floyd, and January 6th insurrection of a Capitol, and other challenges we've had in our district. Like this is what they collectively agree. And they say that, look, as employees, as students, teachers, principals, like we all deserve joy. We all deserve to enjoy our work, right? Like we're doing this work because we love kids, we love students. I do this work because I enjoy going in to classrooms. I love engaging with families and parents and learning from the folks in this district. I love learning about different cultures. So that's joy. So we deserve joy as staff, employees, students, parents, guardians in this district. That our intersection identities must be validated. So I sit here, as we talk, as an African American person, male, right, from the South, growing up in the South, but I have various identities that I have, and so all those must be validated. Not only are we going to acknowledge, for example, that a teacher is white, but also perhaps a woman, and that those intersection identities impact the spaces in which people are in. White men, right, men of color, African American men that identify as transsexual, right? So there's pieces, like there's various identities. We need time and space to connect to our own bodies. Now, this is something very different that I had to learn from. But it really, 3 and 4 has to do with the fact that we have to just keep ourselves healthy. And so, like, one of the things my staff has attempted to do is, like, they're bringing in water. I don't drink a lot of water. And they're saying, like, I need to drink more water. I need to be healthy. I drink all this coffee. And towards the end of the day, I'm just like, I'm dehydrated. And so I need to be in touch with my health, my body. You're going to see that in Goal 2, for example, of the strategic plan, student well-being. My emotions need to be affirmed and validated. There's times when I'm really impacted very differently based on my identity. Sometimes I'm going to be angry. Sometimes I'm going to just really be, sad, frustrated. And so we have to acknowledge and affirm that, right? We're going to have to, as a school community, get away from just ignoring that people have emotions and they're engaging. And that when you love students with all your heart and you don't do your best work, you're going to be frustrated. If you feel that the system's not giving you what you need in terms of supplies, materials, then you're going to be frustrated because you're not doing your best work. So we need to acknowledge that. We don't have all the answers. That's okay and beautiful, right? We're a learning organization. Professionally, I grew up where I expected as an African American man to have all the answers. And part of that was my struggle in predominantly white settings, being worried that white people didn't think I was a smart ass, referred to as stereotype threat. And so part of this work is knowing that we don't need to have all the answers. It's okay, right? We're human. We can't fully engage and learn from each other if we don't allow ourselves to, I don't know. And there's times when we need affinity spaces to thrive. There's times when staff need to have a space in which there are just African American people. There's times when there's a space where people are just speaking Spanish or Somali. There's times when white staff need to talk to each other in a space about what it means to be anti-racist, right? And so we need these affinity spaces to thrive. And then the last piece is, like, we have to have enough time to do what we value. There's always enough time. If we really value something, we make the time for it, right? And the superintendent mentions that sometimes we look at the calendar and we're overwhelmed, we can't get things done. Well, we need to prioritize the things that we value so we get those things done. And again, this is a draft. Not going into all these competencies, but there's 2 categories, all right? And this has changed a bit from the first presentation. There is self-work, so we need to do work on ourselves. And then we need to think about how who we are impacts the people that we engage with. Okay, so understanding self and relationship building. You see there's 11 competencies. This work is going to show up in a couple of places. These competencies will be used to align our professional development. So one of the challenges with equity training is that sometimes people have a desire to attend different trainings, but we want to avoid people getting the same thing. Like there's enough things to learn. So we're going to, moving forward, my hope is by the summer, when people are taking different trainings from various departments, they'll know which competencies that this training will support them on, with the understanding that we want you to do all 11, right? And so this will support the alignment. It's also going to help inform the work around in our Standards of Effective Instruction, our protocol for our teacher evaluation tool, and our principal evaluation tool. So you see 11 competencies that we want to use to drive that work. Now, one of the challenges with this work is like, how do you make it meaningful? Like, how do you make it concrete enough? So this is just an example that we've identified all staff. We have look-fors, both for staff practices and classroom practices. So in order to make it actionable, meaningful, in order to see the extent to which these things are happening or not, we need to be able to develop rubrics and have the ability to see what's happening. And so again, this is a draft, and this work is going to be ongoing. Here's an example. Admit when we make mistakes, reflect and repair harm. Okay, so we need to have the courage to admit that we were wrong. Okay. We're going to do a better job listening. We're going to use our restorative practices. We talk about that in our strategic plan. We want as adults to model for our students that it's okay to make a mistake. So sometimes as adults, or sometimes if we're engaging with families, we make mistakes. And if we would just say, I made a mistake, I blew it, I'll do better, right? You engage. That goes a long way. We're also exploring, we're gonna be courageous in this work. This is an example of staff pushing us, and it's actually aligned to policy 1304, which is what you've seen tonight are a set of staff competencies for all. What the group is saying is that, but we also need to have a set of competencies. Let's try having also additional competencies that are unique for white staff. Okay? So inherently, we need our white staff in this district to be anti-racist. We need our white staff to have the skills and competencies to interrupt, to dismantle systems of white supremacy, right? Knowing what those things are, interrupting, that takes a set of skills and knowledge. We also, working with our non-white staff, indigenous BIPOC staff, we also need to be recognized like how we're impacted by white supremacy, being in systems. I mentioned earlier about how I've needed to overcome stereotype threat, okay? Some of the stressors that I have as an employee of color, and so I need to be in touch with my body when that thing's happening so that I can be my best self. But we're all impacted by white supremacy, quite frankly. Both whites, the need to dismantle. Of course, as people of color, we're constantly needing to dismantle it for our own humanity, I would argue, for white staff, for their own humanity as well. But we act very differently to the system and the climate in which we're in, and we have to collectively work to address areas that negatively impact all of us. So here's a timeline. Very ambitious, but we need to get this done by late November. So there'll be significant engagement in the month of November, principals, community groups, getting feedback. And that's not to say that we can't make revisions, but we also want to align this work to budget cycles as well as professional development in the summer. So in order to develop those systems, in order to change and work with our SOEI and our principal evaluation tools, it's also, we're aiming for late November to have a completed draft. So again, board members, if you have feedback, much appreciated as well. This is certainly work that we're going to do collectively. Moving towards the end, I'm actually on track here. Timeline for hate bias. So we've committed to developing a hate bias incident protocol. Want to mention that we are aware that we have a policy 4200, which is a racial harassment discrimination policy. And as we've done this work, we're interrogating to what extent are people knowledgeable about the policy. There's a really nice set of regulations about what you do on a hate bias incident, hate incident. And so we want to interrogate to what extent people know about the policy and the procedures. So I'll share what we plan on doing regarding that. We also have delved into microaggressions, right? And referencing the Human Resource Equity Diversity Impact Assessment, right? What our staff mentioned, staff of color, is that it's just the daily incidences, the invisibility that impacts the lived experience and the ability to do the best work. So it's the microaggressions that are ongoing that ultimately cause people to disengage and then to leave the district. So we're looking at coming up with a protocol, looking at how do we react student to student, staff to staff, staff to student, staff to parent. Why is this critical? Because there's some things that folks aren't going to know if we have to move to, in some cases, human resources, legal, general counsel, discipline. But I think what we've heard from our community, which has really driven this work, is people just want to know the process. And people want the process to be applied consistently. So as we've interrogated the work, and this is, again, a fantastic work group that's been a part of it across multiple divisions. So thank you all, and we meet weekly to make sure, again, that we're able to get this work done. But we want to have a consistent response to hate bias across the district. Again, consistency is critical for trust. Have a clear definition of what constitutes an incident. The policy clearly identifies what constitutes an incident regarding hate bias, the federal definition, state definition, but we're also struggling with how do we identify microaggressions. And I'm saying we're struggling because we're still trying to figure that out. We're struggling with, like, the fourth bullet, the role of the ombuds office. So we have an ombuds office focusing on students, but also for staff. It's a new position just last year. And so we want to make sure that people throughout the district know what that position does, that there's a clear understanding of the role of the ombuds person relative to the Office of Equality and Civil Rights, right? And so we're wrestling with that relationship. Ultimately, we're going to have a stronger reporting system. We need to be able to identify patterns, both in the larger incidences, but also in microaggressions, so that we don't have things continuing to happen in buildings and or the district office that outlive staff. Okay, so sometimes when there isn't documentation, things can happen, right? Principal turnover, central office turnover, but sometimes the same things happen because we're not documenting that. So we just want to have a system that consistently can allow for identification of patterns. We're wrestling with the timeliness of investigations because we want to improve feedback loops. So when we do an investigation, and there's a limited number of staff that does investigations in the central office. So if we're wanting to accelerate the timeline of these investigations, then we may come forward with a recommendation to enhance that office, because we know how critical it is when something happens and we need to be able to respond appropriately to the community and just say something's happening. Okay? Not what, but something's happening. So we're really working on improving the timelessness. And also, you know, when something happens in a given community, you also want to make sure that you're restoring. Okay, so there's an incident, but then an incident impacts the community. If it happens right in a classroom or it happens in a meeting, right? So we need to be able to restore. We want to make sure that we have consistent application of restorative practices, and we want to make sure that our system, and these are outcomes, there's a clear alignment between the system application of discipline when it occurs and our district philosophy of restorative practices, right? So we have declared we are restorative practices, which means we're able to admit mistakes, which means we're able to grow from those mistakes. If people want to restore, but we don't throw anyone away in Minneapolis Public Schools. We restore, we support. So here's the timeline. And again, you know, wanting to be held accountable for the work. So final draft, so December 9, we'd like to have this ready to go by December 9th so that we're able, and this is a goal, but we'd like to get this going, ready to go, to get professional development started after winter break. Now, we're going to do this in the context of the work, and there's a lot of contextual factors given the pandemic we're in, but again, we're setting a goal to get the protocol done. And so here's what you can expect to see by the end of December. There'll be a flow chart that's available to the public on what to expect for the 4 areas. We'll have a clear definition of the critical incident that'll be visible to our school community. We're also going to pull together a subcommittee of HR, General Counsel, my division, to align current discipline practices to restorative practices. We're going to explore that and look at the possibility of how we can do that. We're going to make sure that there's a clear understanding of the Ombuds Office relative to a larger system, develop supports for people to understand that. We're going to identify needs to improve the timeliness of investigations, clarify the role of restoration. We'll have professional development design and implement it, and then we will have engagement on the protocol. And so that's the work that will be occurring between now and winter break. The last area I'd like to share with you is just want to focus on the idea of staff mental and emotional well-being. And, you know, again, I mentioned at the beginning that, you know, folks in Minneapolis Public Schools have endured a lot. Very unique to the community, you know, with events, with the murder of George Floyd, extending to the ongoing social media, the rise in violence because of underemployment, unemployment, you know, poverty rates increasing, dysregulated students, right, that have not been in school for a significant amount of time. Staff also struggling with, in some cases, loved ones that have been sick or passed away. Just a lot of grief. Okay, and so one of the things that we want to make sure that we do as a school community is that we want to reduce the stigma around mental health. Right? You know, I will say in my own community, right, mental health has a stigma. And so we want to reduce the stigma of mental health. At the same time, we want to recognize that we experience our emotions very differently based on our background. And so we also want to make sure, and we've shared this before, having culturally responsive providers. But we're expanding opportunity supports through our employee assistant program. And so we're just saying that if people need someone to talk to, then there's someone there for them. And so we've made a commitment to expand our employee assistant program. We also, though, duly want to recognize that as we talk about mental health, we also duly, and this is why it's in the presentation, have a responsibility to address climate. Okay? Because one of the things we want to make sure we're not doing is asking people to get mental health supports and have therapy and support, talk about their feelings, in a system in which people aren't valued, heard, and seen. So it's both. It's how do we make sure people are getting what they need, and then how do we actively change the system so that people feel more valued and respected. And I would say this, there's one slide left, but the goal, the vision is perhaps Minneapolis Public Schools can be a place, in spite of all of the racism, sexism, homophobia, violence, sexism that folks experience, perhaps this district can be a place in which people can take a deep breath and be fully human. And so that's the goal, ultimately, of the climate framework. And so we actively work on climate, walking, crawling, climbing, whatever it takes. But then we're providing the support for those staff that need both virtual, and now we're actually expanding more face-to-face opportunities. But this is a district we care. We're a caring district. We're going to make sure we do what it takes to make sure our staff are healthy, because ultimately they're supporting our most precious resource in this community, which are our students. And so that's a commitment, and this comes at no cost to employees in the district, and we're just really happy that we can provide that for folks. But again, there's nothing wrong with going to get support and having someone to talk to. At the same token, based on the previous slides, hopefully we're showing a commitment to making sure that this is a place that all folks, regardless of of race, gender, sexual orientation, income, language. This is a place that people can be valued, heard, and seen. So with that, we'll take questions. Superintendent, I'll turn it over to you and take questions. And just a pleasure to be able to present the really hard work that a number of people across the district have engaged in.
Thank you, Senior Officer Moore. Again, for the board and general public, this is work that has been going on for quite some time. What you saw were different categories, or I guess 4 areas of value that we emphasized around this climate framework, and want to appreciate Senior Officer Moore for his leadership with this. Also appreciate the rest of the team. It's multifaceted, multi-layered. It's not just one department. There's several departments, from our school-based academic team to our human resources team, to conversations with our finance as well, because as a self-insured insurance provider, we're all coordinating this. So with that, Chair Ellison, I'll turn it back to you for questions.
Thank you. Directors, please hit your request to speak button if you have any questions or comments. Thank you, Superintendent Graff, and thank you, Senior Officer Moore, for that great presentation. Student Representative Grover-Meskel.
Well, first I would just like to say that that was an amazing presentation. I think so many things that students across the district just want to see there are there, and I feel like it really affirmed a lot of the work that, you know, everyone in the board has done and also across the district has done, especially with citywide. I was really happy to see that, and I'm really happy to see, student voice so centered so much, and especially in the next few years, just all the amazing things that, you know, these student organizations are going to be able to do. And so just a few questions on, you know, the climate framework. So what are some things that are being done to raise awareness for the climate framework as it's being implemented, especially around students? Because I feel like right now a lot of students aren't aware of the climate framework, and I don't want this to be something that only after it's implemented students are aware of, especially when it comes to like kind of building trust and everything. I have a few other questions, but we can just talk about that one first.
Yeah, I mean, that's the work that we're currently doing. I mean, we did, as part of Workshop Week, we were part of that, focused on staff and awareness on the climate framework. Makes me think about the need to be more deliberate and engaging. I mean, certainly we're engaging students through our youth evaluation. As part of the needs assessment, we will be rolling out the climate framework, asking students for their input. With the rubrics that we've talked about, we'll be asking students to provide feedback on the 4 areas. But let me go back to the team and see what else we can do, because you know, your question really makes me think about the fact of maybe doing more things in assemblies. And again, I'm saying that some schools are doing that work, but I don't think we've done that enough systematically. So I really appreciate that question, and I'm going to follow up on that. But that will be part of the needs assessment process. And thinking about Board Member Grover-Meskel, something you've said before, which is we're very cognizant to not just include citywide, right? But as part of this work, leveraging citywide, our youth evaluators to engage all of our students. But it's critical that all of our students are aware. So yeah, stay tuned. There will be a major push. And again, climate framework, rebranding, Minneapolis together. We're all going to do this work together. So yeah, I mean, we will. We are very deliberate in making sure students are part of this. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I really think students, this is something that they really should be aware of, because I think so much of it, you know, benefits them. And I think even like knowing that the district wants student voice and is trying to bring like autonomy to students, you know, I feel like that would just create student leadership right there, because it makes you feel like, you know, your potential is being realized. Another thing I was just wondering about is that at my school at South, one of the things the equity team is doing is creating a student representative board, and I'm actually on that, and with a few other students. And I was wondering if that's something that either could be pushed for other schools, or could be built up, or even just recommended for other schools. This is the first year that we're doing it, so we're still like kind of building around frameworks and what it's going to look like and everything. But I feel like, you know, if we're trying to build up like student autonomy, And especially when it comes to citywide, since it's like kind of limited to only 2 students, this kind of allows more students to be involved in the work happening at schools.
So would you mind seeing a bit more of like the purpose and what you're doing around that?
Yeah, so the members of the equity team at my school said they wanted students to be involved in the process and to create student representatives as a part of that process. And so right now, it's about like 5 of us right now. And so we're kind of deciding like what we want that to look like. And obviously that'll look different at different schools. But what we're trying to do is to be able to, when staff on the equity team have questions about the student experience, to be able to come back to us and know there are students they can speak to on those things. And also that students feel like they're involved in those decisions that are happening. And especially I feel like, a lot of policy decisions are happening, at sites. Students aren't involved in those processes. So I think having student representatives on the equity team, it helps bridge that, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense, and I'm looking at out in the virtual world. I know staff are writing down that idea, and we will be investigating that. And what's great is that when we talk about our equity engagement leads meeting monthly, that's the purpose of it, is that if there is an equity engagement lead doing some innovative work, then they're sharing that, so that therefore when you have excellent ideas, Jazz mentioned, we can make those systemic. So we'll follow up on that. I think that's fantastic.
Superintendent?
Yeah, Student Representative Deborah Meskel, I just wanted to reinforce those 2 points that I think came out in your questions. One was what Senior Officer Moore mentioned already, making this more systemic across the district. You did see a couple examples of schools, elementary school and the middle school, where they had intentionally engaged in their conversation with students, but we need to be more explicit about that. And to the point you just made about what is happening at South High School, I think that's a model of how we can demonstrate that at a very natural and grassroots level. But certainly we look forward to seeing how that plays out for your school, and if we can use some of that intentional framework as we move into making this more systemic across the district. But wanted to, again, acknowledge those 2 things, being more explicit about it and demonstrating it, and then having it be systemic. And as mentioned already, we're building this framework out, and we'll be expecting more consistent understanding and awareness, and look forward to having our students involved in that.
Yeah, I just think it's really important that we kind of toe the line between getting student voice, but then also not tokenizing student voice, and actually making sure we're doing the work, especially on specific school sites. Because I feel like this is an amazing framework and an amazing plan, but you also have to make sure it's actually like happening at schools. And so I feel like even having students be aware of it so they can advocate for themselves and say, this is a part of the climate framework and we're not seeing it happen, we want it to start happening. If students were aware of the things that are in the climate framework, and more students were aware of it, if that makes sense.
As always, you're on point with your comments. Very appreciate it. We have a process where students will support the interpretation. So we have the needs assessment, co-interpretation, but here clearly that if this is going to be successful, we need to leave and breathe it, which means students need to own it. We need to figure out ways in which there's conversations about what the framework means to all students in various language and various settings. So that is definitely a call to action, and we'll continue to do it.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you. Director Polly?
Thank you, Chair Ellison. So thinking about what we were presented tonight and HR EDA from 2018, I'm wondering about like differentiated retention rates by race in our district. In recent years, the vast majority of district leadership separations are staff of color. So I'm wondering if we can share more about that, and maybe that'd be a Senior Officer Sullivan thing.
Yes, Director Pauly, thank you for the question, and I do think that Senior Officer Sullivan has some data that we can kind of share with you about the retention rates and the specifically over the last couple of years.
Yes, Superintendent, Board of Directors, thank you. Director Pauly, thank you for the question. As you mentioned the HR EDI, we have been following the recommendations from the EDI committee over the last few years, specifically around recruiting, retention and support, contract negotiations, et cetera, really trying to remove those barriers. One of the things we are continuing to track is differentiated retention. And I will just think it's really important to note that as we learned from the EDIA originally, that the quantitative data doesn't necessarily always tell the story or the lived experience. So I think that is really a critical caveat in this. As we look at the last year specifically, I think when I have to get the specific numbers, when we look at teachers, I think we're within a few percentage points of each other outside of retirements. I think it was 95 to 91. So 95% of our white teachers were retained compared to 91% of our teachers of color. I think the opposite was a little bit true, similar within a few percentage points for our principals, where we saw a slight higher retention rate of our principals and APs of color last year. I would say, as you mentioned to your question, as it relates to district leadership, I would say that is probably one of the areas where we see some of the largest disproportionalities around retention. Again, caveating that the number is very small compared to, say, our teachers or our principals, but that is something that's real and what we're looking at. And I think what we shared with the EDIA before was that while we did focus on teachers, I think the findings kind of apply to every level of the organization. So that is something we're continuing to track and look at. We're continuing to do exit surveys and exit interviews to really try to understand and address those disproportionalities.
Thank you. Yeah, and that would be something that, I think you talked about like exit surveys. I don't know if that's something the board could have access to or like a summary of it, just so like we understand what's going on, even if, if there's like data privacy issues, but I think that'd be really helpful for us to see as a board. And I think from a board perspective, this is an important metric to track and to watch. I just think that, I was on the board in the 2018 when there was the HREDI, but I remember we talked a lot about it as a district. It was something we really valued and we really wanted to work on. And if there's areas where we're not doing as well as we want to be or as we should be, then I think we really need to focus on that. And I don't know if you have any comments on that, Superintendent. I have another question, but if you want to.
Yeah, Director Pauly, thanks for the comment. I think that is part of the impetus behind this climate framework too is related specifically to staff. We know that if our staff are not feeling comfortable, if they're not feeling supported, or they're in an environment that's not healthy, that's going to have a direct impact on our students, and it'll have a direct impact on our community and our school climate. So that is, I guess, part of what we have taken from the EDIA, the HREDIA, is to build on this. But certainly, I think we can do more of a reflection. And I believe, Senior Officer Moore, you had an update on EDIA planned for in January or so. So we can bring some of that information back at the policy meeting.
And Superintendent and Chair Ellison, Director Pauly, that's also, looking at this, as mentioned, staff retention, teacher retention will be part of both things we look at as part of the Climate Framework Index. You'll see that metric and goal 4 regarding climate. So that is something that we will be monitoring, tracking the retention rates by employee group.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I just think what we heard, the rates between like teachers and principals versus senior leaders, it just seems very different, very disproportionate. So I think it's something that we need to be focused on. But also I'm interested in learning more about the findings from the hate bias group that you mentioned at the end. And maybe, I know you talked about maybe there being budget implications, but maybe there's also policy implications. Like we have the 4200 policy, but maybe like that's not enough, or maybe there needs to be something underneath it, or things like that. So I just think I'm really interested in learning more of that when it comes out in December. And I think, again, it's something that our board should prioritize in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Elamine.
Thank you, Chair Ellison and board, and again, staff, for this presentation. Again, it's a lot of information. I think the framework outlines a lot of the directions on where we want to go, but I do have several questions on how we're going to do that. You mentioned the site council work. My first question is, with the site council work, do all schools have site councils? And one, how do the parents learn about the power that they hold within that site council? So that's one of my questions. And then we talked about Nellie Stone and showing how they had the mission and vision. I actually had the opportunity to visit Henry with the principal Yusuf, and they have that same model. So again, wanting to see how do we make that the rule as opposed to leaving it just at the leisure of staff to kind of have a leadership role being the standard on how we operate our schools. And then my other questions, we talked about the PD training, the schedule that you shared. My question is that kind of voluntary? Is it mandatory? Explain a little bit more of that, because again, I think it's excellent, but how do we make sure that all teachers are doing it, and how do we evaluate if those professional trainings actually are working for our school and for our district? And then a little bit into the hate and bias too. We talked about it, we have the framework, we have it all laid out, but when we know that these things are happening in our schools and individuals are being removed from the school and being placed in other positions. I mean, to me, that's not handling a situation, that's basically just shuffling it. And I want to see more concrete ways on how we can actually handle these situations to set the example that MPS doesn't tolerate it. That's more of what I'm looking for. So, and then the last one, I think we talked about the schools being the PPE evaluators. How are those schools decided upon, and why is it not all schools? And I'll stop there and let you answer some of those.
Director Elamine, thank you for the questions. I'll let Senior Officer Moore collect his thoughts and just speak to one of the ones that I heard specifically was around the example of Nellie Stone Johnson and Patrick Henry High School, and have seen the work that both those leaders have done, you know, Principal Wright as well as Principal Abdullah. And I think there's that shift in tension that we've been going through as an organization for several years since I've been here, which is we want that identity and autonomy to some degree to let the school community decide what that looks like, but we have to develop the systemic framework. And so I think that is the direction we are going with this climate framework, is that, you know, you can develop it based on the interaction that you have within your school climate and culture, but there are some expectations or non-negotiables that need to be present in the work.
Mm-hmm.
So that is still something that I think we're working through in terms of where schools now have shifted because of their boundaries have changed or their focus of programming has changed. So it's a natural transition for that to happen, and the expectation is that these will be elements that our schools have in place around their mission, vision, and the implementation of the climate. You also had questions about the site councils. I'll ask Senior Officer Moore to speak to that. And then I think something around culture and hate bias.
Yeah. So, Superintendent Graff, Chair Ellison, Director Elamine, I really appreciate the questions. This is why we're doing the EDIA, Site Council Equity Diversity Impact Assessment. Anecdotally, what we know is that not all site councils operate the same way. Not all site councils have the same process to invite membership. There isn't a shared understanding across the district of what a site council does. So we're systematically collecting the information. We are asking that all schools have a site council. But I can tell you that not all schools do. Thinking of a couple of schools, I mean, this is the first year they've actually had a site council. And so that is something that's critical to the climate framework. Now, very aware that site councils, you know, parents don't participate in site councils. In many cases, they don't see the value of them. Sometimes they're identified as an institutionally white construct. But that's based upon like when site councils are offered. So, you know, one of the things we'll be asking our schools to take a look at is if the time of when you offer your site council is getting in the way of representation, going back to the value equity representation and racism climate framework value, then you shift the timing of your site council. Right? The ultimate goal is to have a representative group. So how do we know we're collecting information, and then our associate superintendents are working with our principals to make sure that we have site councils, and that's something we will be reporting to you as we give updates in the climate framework. So that's why we're doing the EDIA, quite frankly. I think the superintendent answered the mission and vision. The professional development, that's for teacher leads. So that's actually a paid stipend position through QComp funding. So that's an expectation of receiving the funding. And so we keep attendance, and we want to make sure, and it's supportive attendance. We want to make sure that people participate in that, and if they're not able to participate, then you just have a conversation, and you things come up, but you do ask for people to be committed to leading the work. I mean, that's part of being a leader. Teacher leader is you show up and you lead, and you're committed to the work. So we do keep track of that. There is a metric that we will be proposing regarding climate, which will be monitoring the percent of staff that are participating in equity training. And so that's something that we will be monitoring, how to ensure, that's something we'll work with the superintendent, human resource department in terms of being accountable. But it's an expectation that staff are receiving professional development on equity. That's who we are. Those are our values. So we'll continue to monitor that. You'll get updates on the percent of staff that are participating in quality equity training. And then school-based parent participatory evaluation. We selected, there's a couple of pieces there. As part of our teacher equity plan, work, we identified the 15 schools that are identified as racially identifiable with the highest percentage of free and reduced lunch and students of color. So that's how the 15 were selected. Couple of reasons. One, capacity. It is a very time-intensive model, so we want to make sure we can do it well. So we went from 2 now to 15. But we also, 215, we're paying stipends, so that was part of our budget. We do have identified in the ESSER recommendation an expansion of parent evaluation to up to 40 locations. But we want to make sure we deliver it. So again, last year was the pilot at 2 sites. Now we're moving to 15. And we just look at scale. I mean, I think it's a great model. We're going to wrestle with scalability. Can we continue to have high levels of quality while being able to deliver that work? So we're exploring that right now. But that's how it's the 15 schools with the highest free and reduced lunch and populations and student of color.
And if I can just do a follow-up with the professional development.
Yes.
So it's required that they go. So how do we know that these teachers are actually implementing it in the classroom and that it's showing up to be effective for our teachers?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work of our principals, but this is also why we want to align the work that we're doing on equity within your standards of effective instruction, working with the human resource department, so that when we're doing our observations, we're also observing equity. When we're doing our observations of our principals, we're observing equity. In order to do, for example, the curriculum transformation work, people have to possess those set of competencies. So we're also going to be doing professional development with all of our coaches. So our coaches are going to also have those look-fors. If you look at the equity competencies, this is exactly why we're trying to make it more concrete and have look-fors for staff, look-fors in the classroom, trying to be more explicit to make it real. So that's the work we're building into our existing structures for observations. We'll look for continued participation, again, monitoring. But I think you're asking a critical question, because ultimately we want to make sure that it's being applied. Any professional development, you have opportunities to get the information. There's application. This work is part also of our professional learning communities. You have an opportunity to discuss, right? Look at information, and then you come back and get more information. So this is our cycle. One of the things I'm really proud about what the comprehensive district design is the equity training is an ongoing budget line. So oftentimes when districts, and I've been doing this now close to 20 years, you're relying on a grant to do equity training, right? Or it's offered one time. This is an ongoing budget line, Fund 1 budget line, general fund, that the board has committed to saying every year we're going to put aside a pot of money to ensure that people have equity training. And now you're asking the right question, which is we need to be accountable for making sure people go through that. So that'll be a part of the updates that we give Director Elamine and board members. It's one of the strategic plan metrics, percentage of staff that are participating in equity training. And we'll set a target for you. But we said, I think the number was 100% of staff will participate in training over the next 5 years. That's it, 5. Former Executive Director Logan pushed me on 3. So but in the next 5 years, everyone, I mean, this is the way we do. But again, we have the equity competencies similar to what Anderson did, is that the people we hire right? I mean, there's an expectation as we hire new staff that they possess those characteristics. And I'll say one last thing. When I first entered education, I experienced equity as, well, that's a great teacher or a great principal. They know their content, but they don't do equity well. That's not a value we have in Minneapolis. If you're going to be an excellent teacher, principal, leader in this district, you have to do equity. You have to understand those competencies. And so again, that's the long-term work of redefining what a quality staff person is in Minneapolis Public Schools. So that's the work, but you'll get reports and we'll monitor that and we'll set targets.
And if I can ask one last question. When we talked about the emotional well-being, when we talk about our students, I'm just speaking again from being a Black parent, from being a Black mom, emotions do show up. But at the same time, I don't want emotions to be the reason why we're not teaching. You know, and I know in my home, you know, my son, my daughters can play on emotions to get out of doing things. And so I want us to just, again, be aware, like I think it was outlined, to give them that opportunity to be in that space, but at the same time still push them and make sure that we're educating and that emotions is not the reason that they're not getting what they need.
Director Elliman, I appreciate that. I mean, at 100%, we support students on their needs. We support our adults supporting our students on their needs, but there's always an expectation of learning and rigor. And as going back to previous, I mean, this is why we're here. Proper ways to engage, proper ways of knowing our bodies and our emotions as we're engaging with each other in an emotional way and affirming what we feel. We still expect all students to learn. We still expect our education professionals to teach. We still provide opportunities for our students, both inside and outside the classroom. So we do our work. And so really appreciate that. And I think there was a, Superintendent, the hate bias question regarding policy 4200, I'll refer that to you. It wouldn't be, and Director Elliman, you had a question about policy 4200?
Yes.
Hate bias?
Thank you.
Yeah, so Director Alamina, just to reinforce what Senior Officer Moore mentioned about the, or you mentioned about the emotions, high expectations and high support. There's a moment in time where someone might be experiencing something, and as we've already said, we give them that space, and we come back, and then we review what those expectations are, figure out what led to that, how the student, you know, processed it, and then what do we need to do for following up on that. So that is something that I was at a school yesterday and witnessed, I had a conversation with the principal just about that. You know, there's a level of expectation that we have to have and consistency around it. It doesn't devalue what the emotions are for the student. It gives them an opportunity to experience that, express that, and then we come back around what are the expectations. Regarding the hate bias and I'm not sure if I recall the question, but what are we doing in the case where we have a situation and ensuring that people are not being moved around, I think it was, in terms of the concern. So there are layers of that. This is obviously a process that we're going into right now to try and identify what those protocols are for communication, what is the proper flow chart, if you will, to understand if there is an incident and it is warranted that there are disciplinary actions that's taken, that we make sure it goes that direction versus what happens now, I think, is a lot of people make these assumptions about something that happened or didn't happen. And so then they're basing that on, well, this person just got moved. And really there's not a lot of clarity around what actually occurred or didn't occur from at least the investigation point that we sometimes can't share. So trying to provide greater clarity around what the process is so that people will understand this is something that is going to be addressed through disciplinary action, or this is something that was addressed or resolved in a different manner and doesn't rise to that level of concern of it being a disciplinary action. So I think that's the tension we have right now. People will hear about an incident and they'll jump to an assumption of all the facts and say, this is what happened, this is what the consequence should be. And truly what we're finding out is that when the investigation occurs, there's more to it than what is heard and what is told, and we have not done a very good job of explaining that to people so that we can move forward in a way that is respectful of both the concern that has been raised up as well as the individual employee and what their future holds.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair Ellison. This is a great conversation, and Director Elamine took my first two questions, so those have been answered. However, it's given me the opportunity to speak a little bit about site council and how much we all know how important site councils are. I think I started sitting on site councils in 2009, 2010, and I roughly have probably sat on at least 10 site councils in my whole history of being an advocate for Minneapolis public schools. And there are schools that didn't have site councils. There are still schools that don't, and I understand what that struggle can be. Some of the things that I would bring up in the past was being able to accommodate families so that they are able to attend site council, and that might mean later in the evening. And I understand that there are folks that work all day long. They have their own families to take care of. So there are still those barriers. One of the things I had advocated for prior to getting on the board in regards to accommodating parents is having another parent who's on that site council that's actually connecting with those parents that cannot be at those meetings because they have to work or because they have other engagements that they need to be involved in. And is there some kind of stipend that the district could actually give to those families? And this would be in those schools where typically you don't see a site council. And the other thing I wanted to mention is Director Elamine mentioned power in the site council, and it is a very, in my opinion, a very powerful position. And when I say powerful, powerful in the sense that your voice is literally at the table discussing the school climate, discussing all of the different parameters of your school with your principal, with teachers who are required, some teachers who are required to be on site council, and with business owners that have businesses within the area. And there's those relationships that can be developed with parents and those folks at that table. Now, ultimately, the principal has, the complete say over what happens, but you're still providing input, and you can actually begin to see where some of that input is actually being implemented into the school. So I bring up the year that I started to get to 2021 and say that it does take time to see progress. This is something that we have asked for, we have argued about, and I'm finally starting to see it grab a hold and take legs. So I really do appreciate the attention to detail that has been paid in something that has been incredibly important to me in my advocacy. And it's just, I'm just really proud of the work that's gone into it, because I literally would have to knock down doors to get on some site councils because I couldn't get a response from a leader, or reaching out to district leaders to get me into the building because I wanted to find out what was going on, right? Or being at site councils early in the morning, I waited tables at night, so I was able to do that. Not very many parents can do that, right? Because they're either working in the morning or they're getting their kids to school. So a lot of those practices, I hope, are going to change. I'm sure they're going to, because this presentation has just blown me away in terms of what to expect. So I think at one time somebody dubbed me the site council queen. Well, we'll be beheading people if we don't continue down this road to making sure that these site councils do exist in the schools that don't have them, because there are plenty of them. The last thing I want to say is actually a request. We talk about school climate, and as important as it is, and the staff, leadership, I wanted to speak to the security. That climate, they are also a thread within this climate framework, because I would really like it if we could get some kind of a presentation in regards to what they've been doing to be a part of this climate framework when it comes to mitigating circumstances with students and students with staff. And I say that because we just obviously got back into the buildings. We've got some students who haven't had a chance to transition, right? Fourth graders haven't had a chance to transition, and now they're in sixth grade, you know, and developmentally, they may not necessarily be right where they could have been if they had been able to be in the building. No different for a seventh grader who is now a ninth grader. And so I think I would appreciate some kind of presentation, and I think the public has a right to hear it as well about what Mr. Matlock's department and the gentlemen and women and people that are working in our schools as, I don't know, what do they call climate, what's the term that we're using? 'Cause I don't, safety. Professional safety specialist. Professional safety specialist. I'd like to know what they're doing and how they're playing a part in this climate framework and assisting staff and schools when it comes to situations that arise. And let's just be honest, there isn't a school on the face of the earth that hasn't seen a fight, right? So I just would really appreciate that information.
Yeah, Superintendent Graff, Chair Ellison, Director Cabrini, we'll say that conversation, as we were developing the climate framework, physical, emotional safety and well-being, that conversation took place in that committee, chaired by Jason Matlock. So that idea of that position moving from the traditional liaison officer to the new position, the idea was to have a focus on the relationship development. And so I think, I mean, they're well positioned to provide an update on that, you know, confident that what they'll share is going to be of high quality. So just wanted to share with you that Jason Matlock that unit was a part of that physical, emotional safety and well-being area. And that's something that they've been really paying attention to detail. And they partner with our mental health department under Judy Brown's leadership, equity and engagement, the social emotional learning, school social workers. So they're all working together, and they meet regularly on how to support students' needs from a critical incident going from tier 3 all the way, tier 1, 2, 3. So I think it'll be a very positive presentation.
Awesome. So the last thing, oh gosh, it's going away. Shoot. It went away, it flew.
It'll come back.
It'll come back.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Director Arneson?
Thank you. I just really didn't want to let the moment go by without saying that I really enjoyed this discussion, your presentation here tonight. It was just really well articulated, and I really appreciate the work that's been done here. So I did not want to let that go by, noting the time. So I just have more of a clarity question, just a little clarification, and just I guess a comment. First, I just appreciated in particular that you highlighted, well, I appreciated a variety of different things, including what you said is that it's really important that we say out loud what we're doing because people aren't aware, right? Like to see just the extent of the work that is being done, kind of, it's just the daily work that gets done, and just in particular knowing that this is done in a context of which the people doing this work are subbing and doing other people's jobs, right? Like that we're just in that place right now. That's the world right now, and I wholeheartedly agree that I feel like the world is in an intense place of grief right now. And I feel like it's coming up. We see the phases of grief that come up, right? Like all the time. Mostly in denial and anger is what I feel like our phases are in right now. I do want to highlight as well, I particularly appreciated the connection you made to the potential budget investments that we've made, and just connecting it to our values and just seeing that as an opportunity for the board to continue to support. If this is something that we value, that is, I see potential financial investment. So it was a nice connection that you've made between financial investments and values, in particular investing in our students and how we're using our QComp dollars. I think we do value the input of our students, and their time is definitely worth it, and we want to acknowledge that. But I also see it as a potential in our future, right? Like our students are brilliant and offer us amazing feedback every day. But I would hope that by financially supporting this, that we're developing their skill set, allowing them the time to be there, so that one day they will go forth and share their talent and ideas with the world, right? Like that's what I see it as. I see it as an investment in our students and an investment in our future. And certainly this world needs them, and they're worth the investment. And then I just wanted to this is where my clarity question comes in, is we've taken a little sidetrack tonight to the HR world. And I think that I'm interested in connecting that, because I think to what I think the intent was here tonight. And that's this fundamental belief that if we have a positive school climate and culture, that will lead to positive academic results.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that kind of inference is, and this is an inference, I think that it might be a causality, might be instead of is that if we have a positive school climate and culture, district climate and culture, people will want to continue to work here. I think that's
Absolutely.
right. Like that's kind of the inference, and we won't go into the research of that. So in order for that to work, we have to do two things. We have to effectively support people in creating this climate and culture, and then we have to find a way to measure it, right? To like help them help us understand if it's happening. So my question is, we have a process that we know that's bargained, and it includes telling people what we expect them to do when they work here, right? And then supporting them and helping them, or parting ways if that does not work. And so I noticed you referenced using SOEI tools, and I'm just wondering if we could speak that clarity maybe is that's the evaluation tool. And so I'm just looking for some clarity, or maybe affirmation or confirmation, I guess, that are you saying that the goal is that that the things that you've mentioned on that slide is now being worked into the SOEI, which is our evaluation tool, correct? That's an evaluation tool, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the goal is then, so this will now become part of our evaluation tool, and therefore become part of our HR process. Is that like what we're saying here tonight?
Dr. Arneson, if I could have Senior Officer Sullivan speak to it a little bit, because I think, first of all, just clarifying the term SOEI, and then the process that Senior Officer Moore shared here this evening is kind of the intent, but I'll ask Senior Officer Sullivan to share that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Director Arneson, for the question. As you say, to your first point, this work and HR work is so completely linked, so I think you're seeing a lot of connections there. The Standards of Effective Instruction, which we call SOEI, is our kind of coaching and development tool for teachers. It is also around classroom instruction. It is also used for observations, which is one part of our teacher evaluation system. We also have the Standards of Effective School Leadership, which is our tool for principal coaching and development, and also part of the principal evaluation process. We are working this year to take the equity competencies with Senior Officer Moore just shared and embed those into those two tools, so they're deeply aligned. So we'll be both for a coaching and development process, but they are part of the formal evaluation.
Great. So that, go ahead.
Sorry, again, just to clarify, the intent would be both for teachers as well as leaders.
Great. All right. So then there's an opportunity then for the board I'm just thinking about the board's opportunity to engage in that, right? And that would be through our contract negotiation process, our discussion, right, on how we continue to use evaluation tools and what role we want that to play with our employees would be our evaluation. The other connection I'm hearing then is our values with investment, with dollars and investment. And then lastly, I think will probably be connect to our November discussion when we talk about our strategic plan and metrics, right? Like, and that's and you referenced here tonight, like this area is the opportunity, if our board wants to embrace kind of, you didn't use the word non-traditional, but beyond some of the current evaluation tools. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Director Chair Ellison, Director Arneson, I mean, that was I think the charge as we were developing metrics and the strategic plan is to go beyond math and literacy. And so the goals reflect that, the metrics well. And I just wanted to point out, so we have the evaluation tools, performance management, but then there's also a line to high level of support. So the reason why we're mapping out the look fors is that that's going to drive the professional development we do. So, we're holding folks accountable for what we're expecting to see, but we're going to, as Superintendent mentioned, have high level of support so that people are very clear on what to expect and where they can find that support in multiple venues. So we're attempting, the goal of all this work is attempting to align all this work with climate framework, with our values and strategic plan, with our metrics, with our professional development, trying to have an aligned system so that we can continue to move the work forward on behalf of our kids. So thank you for your comments.
Yeah, great. This is a great discussion and precursor for the discussions to yet to be had. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Inns.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. And I want to say thank you as well for the presentation, and thanks to the board, other fellow board members for the great comments and questions and discussion. You know, I think about this. I'm really glad that we're doing this work, and that this presentation and this place where we are right now with the climate framework is, I feel like it's more complete than even what I mean, it's not like we're seeing the result of it yet, but the process that we're in the middle of is more detailed and more imaginative and creative and useful than I think almost what we imagined it would be at the beginning, right? All the work that we've done through the committees and the input from the community and schools at the school level with students, and all of it has really borne a lot of really wonderful fruit, right? And it makes me feel really glad that I'm on this board with this public institution doing work that is really important and that I know our community supports, that our city supports, and that we are being explicit about being anti-racist and doing our best to make ourselves better, right? And I appreciate that work very much from all of our staff and the support from the board as well. It has reminded me a little bit when I first started teaching. I worked at what was then the Interdistrict Downtown School, which was part of the West Metro Education Program. And that was part of the integration program that the state had done. And they had anti-racist PD that was a part of their culture in those two schools, Crystal and the Interdistrict Downtown School. And that wasn't my first exposure to a lot of equity work, but it was part of the culture there. And I think about the other teachers that I worked with there, and some still work there, in fact, and some have gone on to other districts, and they continue to carry forth that anti-racist work, and it's become part of our culture. And the work that we do now as part of this district is good, not just for our schools, right, but it's good for our community. And so I'm really proud and glad that we're doing that work. There's a couple of themes that I just wanted to highlight. The accountability piece and the thing you said about being accountable to process. And, you know, we've talked a lot about that, EDIA, the HR EDIA from a number of years ago. And I think it was really profound when the folks in that committee stood up and said, you need to be accountable to us for this. Don't give up on it. Don't just be like, we're not done now, right? Oh, we did the committee, and I think that had happened in the past maybe with some EDIAs. It's like, okay, here's the report. We're out of here, right? And I feel like that's something that, you know, that's where why we are where we are, is because we have been accountable to some of these processes and the work that we've been doing over the last few years. And we don't say, oh, well, this is tough. Maybe we'll just be quiet about that one, right? So, so I appreciate that, and I think that we need to continue to be accountable to these processes and see them through. And that means, like, a lot of this stuff is challenging, right? So for instance, talked about the measurements of success. How do we measure this? And being, going further, as what Director Arneson said. Or what Director Alameen was talking about is, like, how do we embrace the humanity of our kids and at the same time hold them to high expectations, right? And how do we embrace the humanity of our staff and hold them to high expectations as well? And so that's really difficult and challenging. And one of the things that you said is, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of, we don't kick anybody out or we don't kick anybody to the curb. Do you remember what the exact phrase was?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure.
We don't throw anybody out.
We don't leave anyone behind.
No, that wasn't it.
I don't know. I don't have notes.
I don't remember what it was, but like that, I think, don't throw anybody away. I think
Yeah,
that's what
don't
you
throw
said,
anybody away.
right? We don't throw anybody away, and that's what public schools are all about, right? And that's what our public institutions ought to be about, right? And I'm glad that we're able to do this hard work and still maintain that ethic. So I appreciate that. I know that we have a long ways to go. You know, when we talk about civil rights and progress that's made in civil rights, there's progress that's been made, but when we look at our world today, right, sometimes we wonder, right? And sometimes it can be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So we keep going forward, right? We don't throw anybody away, and we continue to do this hard work. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to the board and the staff for continuing to do that. So.
Superintendent Graff and Chair Ellison, Director, I just have to say, I mean, one of the learnings, I mean, hopefully it came across in this presentation, was just the number of people that have been involved in this work, and it's just been humbling. It's been a learning experience, an example of when you have shared decision making and power, you're co-creating. Like, you can do some really just amazing work, and it also shows the power of parent voice, student voice. So I even think about the beginning of the climate framework, which came right after the comprehensive district design, and people weren't, people were in various emotional states. A lot of number of people want to participate in this process that were extremely unhappy, but we worked together, and amazing staff helped develop the belief statements, and this is what comes out of that. So we don't always have to agree. But I really fully believe in my heart that we all are committed to our children and our community. And so if we stay engaged and do this work, we can really do some amazing things. So it's just a general testament to the team. We have an amazing group of staff and principals and students and teachers, and we just have to engage. And you're right, this is some really hard work. We're going to have some very difficult conversations moving forward. But I believe it's worth it. You can't do anything. You can't be any more blessed than being able to do work on behalf of children in this district. And so we have to, as adults, engage in the work and really and take the feedback. Like, one of the things as part of this process, and like, students are right on. Like, they ask really tough, honest questions, and we have to. Part of this culture change is taking a deep breath and listening. You're not always trying to explain over students. And so I just really appreciate both my growth and also working with the team here, the staff from superintendent, senior leadership, principals, teachers, parents, students. This is all reflective of the values of this community. So it feels good, and I appreciate your words. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will thank you very much, Senior Officer Moore, for the presentation. I would like to know about the participation of the site council, ELL families, how that's, particularly I would like to know about the Latina families, the Hmong and the Somali parents, and I believe it's very important that we have to really emphasize that it's important that they have to be part of the decision-making process of their children's schools. And thank you.
Just to acknowledge Superintendent Graff, Chair Ellison, Director Ali. That's part of the representation. And I think about some of the work that Director Cirillo has done of really actively recruiting Spanish-speaking families, right? And many of you, as board members, Director Ali, actively recruiting families in your areas. Like, that's the work. And again, the difficult part, but it's what we have to do. What we're supposed to do is having different times in which we're offering the site councils in different languages. Make sure the bylaws are in different languages, right? And those, like, that feels sometimes as a system that hasn't done that in the past. but that is core work if we want to be inclusive. So we will be, as we're doing the equity, diversity, impact assessment on site councils, looking at representation not only by race, but also by language and making sure it's representative. And what we can expect to see when you go to site councils, and I've been to some of the site councils and some of the meetings, is some schools do an amazing job when you walk in the door and you see documents in multiple languages and you see interpretation in multiple languages, and that's just the way some schools do the work. And so that's a commitment across the board of all schools should be having that model of inclusion. So we'll make sure we monitor that, and this is why we're doing the equity, diversity, impact assessment.
Thank you. Director Soria?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one clarification. So site councils, are they a mandate through state legislature?
I'm not aware of that, Superintendent.
Director Cerrillo, thank you for the question. Not to my knowledge, I think site councils were established here in Minneapolis Public Schools as part of our expectations prior to my arrival. I think it was 2015 or so. They had put those in motion.
There's a statute in our state, so maybe perhaps that's a question for our council. I'll follow up with that. So did you say all Minneapolis schools have site councils or not?
No, I think we're investigating that. I can clearly say they don't.
Okay.
But that's something that is part of the equity, diversity, impact assessment. We're asking all principals to have a site council. So what I would say is by fall, every school should have a site council.
Okay, because our website does say that all Minneapolis public schools have site council, so that is not correct.
I think that's an ongoing tension. That is correct. All schools do not have a site council. And I think that part of the work on the equity, diversity, impact assessment, and then in general, the accountability is making sure that our policies and regulations are being implemented with fidelity. I mean, this is why we do the fact round and have the investigation, do the additional professional development, and we do it continuously because one of the things we can't take for granted is that as staff leave, right, we don't want that knowledge to go away. We want that to be part of the work. So every school, that's a commitment. It is in the climate framework. It's then that'll also, I believe, there's a metric regarding site councils in the strategic plan. Every school will have a site council by the fall.
Okay. And I remember you and I had this conversation 2 years ago about site councils because Emerson did not have the bylaws enacted in 5 years, and we went through our own, situation to make things better. So I'm looking here to what extent our schools are implementing site councils according to our policy. So when we talk about accountability, if schools are not following their own rules, what kind of measurements we're going to be implementing to create a reprimand or come up with, some sort of accountability to ensure that principals are following our own policies?
Director Cerrillo, thank you for the comment around site councils. Again, these are things that have been worked on and not successfully, obviously, creating that systemic approach. And so with the EDIA consideration that's taking place, there will be in the strategic plan also metrics for reporting and measuring. And as the superintendent and offering those supports, I mean, it's my job to make sure that they're happening. And so if the board is requesting that there's disciplinary action with administrators, that's a different conversation. But my expectation would be once we get clarity and we're providing those reports to the board and to the public, that those expectations will be happening. And so it could be a number of reasons also. I don't want to misrepresent that there's, it's something specific to an individual. I know with transitions of principals, there are some who have created site councils that are not functioning site councils. They're more of a body, in terms of names on a sheet of paper versus an actual process that they go through. So that's part of the work that we have to do with our site councils as well, is to make sure that they're more than just a list of people who are, identified as site council, but they don't have those bylaws, as you mentioned, or they don't have the clear protocols and expectations.
So how do we oversee and ensure that they are doing what they need to? I mean, is this going to be like yearly,
Yes, it is.
It's something that we ensure that they are doing what they need to.
Yeah, I guess, sorry to interrupt. It is actually an annual thing, and that is part of what we have to create is this expectation, high expectations, high support. So we need to make sure that people understand clearly that this is part of our process. Every year that they identify their site council, that they have clear parameters around what the engagement looks like for a site council. So there may be situations where, as mentioned already, I'm not able to get a site council pulled together because my meetings are at 6 o'clock at night. Well, you need to change the timeline for your meetings, you know? I mean, you have to look at those kind of scenarios. So those are all the things that will come into play with the monitoring and the expectations. And ultimately, what we should see is we should see greater representation across our schools. So you don't have a school that is, 75% students of color and have 80% of your site council members who are white. Those are examples as well that exist that I wouldn't say are representative of the site council that we want.
Correct. And just to follow up as well with Director Caprini's point, to provide a stipend for parents, we used to pay from our PTA interpreters to ensure that we had the involvement of parents at Emerson. So, when it comes to allocating funding as well, that should be part of the equation to ensure that we are inclusive in putting the money behind that as well. I have so many questions. I'm not done, so a few more. I wanted to get a little bit background on the hate bias incident protocol. Can you explain to me what is the intention behind this?
So
Yes, Lieutenant.
I can start, and then you can fill in, Senior Officer Moore. So this has come about through situations that have happened in the district, as well as situations that have happened across the nation. There was a heightened concern about the act of hate and bias and just things that have happened across our country and have also happened in the district. And it's come from the community in many cases where there's an incident that they're told of or they hear about, and they want to know what the process is that the district is taking to address this. And what we've learned through that is that we are struggling with how much we can communicate because of the privacy that has to go into an investigation, as well as what are the steps and processes that people can take if they feel like they've been in a situation, either with another employee or with a supervisor. What process can they take to ensure that they are getting their needs met? And there are different areas, obviously, that we need to clarify, whether that's filing an EEO complaint or going to an ombuds person. So there may be, restorative justice practices that they can engage in. So I think we were looking at this from a holistic vantage point, saying there are a number of things we want to address. First and foremost is our values as an organization, and what do we want to have come out of these conversations? What are we looking for? And I think you saw that in Senior Officer Moore's slide. We want joy, for all of our employees. We want that. So creating a climate around that. Yeah. But then going into what does that process look like for an employee? Do they know what avenues they have available to them to address a concern? What does it look like for the community in terms of information that we can provide to them? How we communicate to them, what we can communicate? What does that timeline look like? Right. Because many times we're working with, contractual employee obligations and requirements, and so we have to work through that process, and it feels to some like you're not addressing anything, you're not doing anything, when in fact it goes through, a period of investigation, and then in some cases there's an opportunity for a grievance, depending on the contract, and so those things cannot get finalized until all that is complete. Okay. So it's a series of things that we were looking at, but I think it comes back to, again, part of the values that we have as a district and wanting to make sure that we're setting our staff up for success and using it as a clear learning opportunity for addressing any of these concerns that we have that are not aligned to our policy.
Thank you. One last question. So when it comes to, some schools have to fundraise money to purchase, like materials for, teachers, so that they can provide certain things for their students. I'm very well aware of this situation, especially in schools like Emerson, where we have a high concentration of Latino students that live, below the poverty level. So what are the changes that we anticipate due to the EDIA? What are the plans? I don't expect you to answer that right now, but, put it in your notes, because we need to be not only having good intentions, but also be very intentional into what that is going to look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Caprini, came back to you.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is, back in the day, there used to be some schools that would have a site council, but then they would have a group that met in another room and was basically making all the decisions. And at the time, there were plenty of us that didn't really know what was going on. We thought we were the ones moving the ship around and taking care of things. And I bring this up because that was a long time ago, and I just really appreciate where we are, because again, it does take time to get to where we want to be. I can remember the first time I was asked to sign something at a site council, and I showed up, and this piece of paper was slipped in front of me. It was the SIP. No one told me what it was. There was the SIP and the FIP, and no one said a word, but they expected me to sign it. And instinctually, in my gut, I just felt like, I need to read that before I sign it. And we were there probably longer than anybody wanted to be there, but what I found is that half the things that they say we were doing, we weren't. And so I can't preface enough how important it is for our schools to actually let people know, and for us as individuals, important it is to be on site council, because everything that's driven through that school improvement plan, that family involvement plan, are all documents that are driven from here into the schools, and they're actively doing it. And understanding how your budget works, and why we have to make cuts at schools at certain times, or all of those things are right inside there. And it literally will give you much more information, and you can also feel more comfortable, because now you're able to take it to that next level and completely understand what happens at this level. So I can't preface it enough that we have literally moved that rock. We have literally moved a rock, because it was literally the Stone Age back in the day when I was dealing with what I was dealing with. So I can't say it enough. This is awesome work. Thank you.
I just have to reference, so one of the things that you're, as reference, experiencing is, as part of Title I, you have to have parents sign off on your family improvement plan. But again, going back to two areas: relationships, trust, and communication, shared decision-making, and voice. We have to be very transparent about our processes. And I think if we're able to be transparent, and also refers to the hate bias protocol, people just need to have feedback loops. They need to know what they're participating in. We need to do what we say we're going to do. And that goes a long way to improving climate. And in fact, that's what our families have said to us year after year. I didn't know what I was signing. Well, that doesn't support relationship, trust, and communication, particularly if school B, someone's had a very different experience. So recognizing our historical narrative, particularly among folks of color, we have to be consistent and do sometimes it feels like extra work, but we have to make our existing structures work for all. Right? Part of the work of the comprehensive district design is our existing structures and processes were working for some in certain parts of the city. And so everything that we do, we have to be consistent, and we need these structures to work for all to support, again, relationship, trust, communication, shared decision-making, and voice. And frankly, if we address those two areas, we can see more representation. We will have more equitable practices. So again, it's intentional, and it's based upon not only your experience, but like other feedback that other parents have shared with us about their inconsistent experience with site council. So really appreciate the board's leadership on that area. And, you know, it will be monitored. So part of the equity, diversity, impact assessment process is that we monitor the extent to which we're successful on the recommendations, both with the EDI committee, but now it's also part of the metric within the strategic plan. And that goes back to your request as a board superintendent to aligning all of our metrics and strategies. And so, again, this is alignment, and the things that you value, you're going to see both in the strategies and also what we measure, because that's what's presented to you. So I would agree. I've heard the same stories. I've heard the inconsistencies, and this is why we're focusing a light on that particular process. And it's critical. It's critical for the climate framework. So we have to have functioning site councils. We do know that there are other groups that meet. And so we want to just make sure that whatever groups are meeting, that the site council is operating the way it needs to. And so the expectation is that they're representative. So it may mean that we need to change the times, or maybe you offer different opportunities. But that's the work we'll do. And we're going to find out what are the barriers that are getting in the way of people participating in site councils. We'll move from anecdotal to more systematic, and it's real. And you've experienced that with HR EDIA, the placement EDI, et cetera. So appreciate your comment, and I think you're right on. The data is going to support your own experience. And we'll make recommendations for both perhaps policy, the possibility. That's what the EDI does. Site council as well as fundraising. And then we'll process changes are always recommended too, and we'll engage those implementers on ways to do the work better with high level of support. So thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Thank you, directors, for your questions and comments. I'm excited about the conversation we've had about site councils. It took me back to my first experience in policy, education policy, when my children were in elementary school at Emerson. They're in their 30s now. I sat on the site council, so it seemed like a lifetime ago. But yes, it also seemed very much like a white construct. And what I'm excited about our conversation tonight, and what Nellie Stone Johnson's doing, what Henry is doing, is that maybe they're finding a way to make it work for their community. And that introducing site council in all our schools, I think, will change how we view site councils. And so thank you for that conversation. The reports back, Director Caprini, about the security, and maybe as part of our climate, we can hear back about how those positions are going. Director Powley, I heard you on our staff, and maybe in HR EDIA update, we can hear some more about that. I want to thank Student Representative Gabor Meskel for talking about student and all the work you've done with students and guiding them this year. I think is amazing, and I agree we need to get more students involved, have more voice for students, and I just want to make sure I thanked you for that. And I want to thank everyone for the work here tonight on this framework. Superintendent Graff, Senior Officer Moore, and all your staff. Presentation, the discussion here tonight has been amazing. So I'm going to now adjourn this meeting. Our next board meeting will be at 5:30 on November 9th. Good night.